And away we go. So hello everybody, welcome to this Surveyor's Toolbox reveal, which David Pestridge has agreed to do. A little bit about David, I'm sure he'll tell you a bit more about himself, but David's been a surveyor for a number of years, I think a dozen plus from memory. He is a fellow of the Institute and has joined our management board in recent years as well. So he contributes greatly to what we do as an organisation. And as I constantly remind him, he's one of our younger board members. So I'll leave you to have a smirk about that. But certainly you are younger. Lovely to see you all here today. I've seen the contents of David's toolbox before, which sounds dreadful, doesn't it? But I think you'll find this interesting. I've also watched David when he's whacking a steel hull with a 2-pound hammer. And I'm looking forward, David, to reconnect you with your 2-pound hammer. I suspect you have other fascinating things in your toolbox. Without further ado, can I introduce David Pestridge?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on which time zone you're in. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Mike. Very kind of you. Mike's right. I've been surveying for 13 years now, since I left the military after a 17-year career as an engineering officer in Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. So I've been an engineer all my life. I came to surveying really almost by accident in many ways. The idea was planted into my head by the chief engineer of a ship on which I was working during my service. And he said, well, obvious career for you next is a marine surveyor. So I looked into that, and then 14 years ago, found myself in the same chair that many of you are sat in now, working my way through the modules and thinking, okay, you know, what sort of business is this? What sort of business model can I do? And so on. And so quite literally, 2008, I left the military, built my own little website, printed some business cards, went around visiting yards, handed my business cards out and waited for the phone to ring, a path that's been trodden by many surveyors before and since. But the subject today really is about the surveyor's toolbox. Obviously, I can't be there to share it with you in person and lay it all out on the table. So I've sent a couple of pictures in. Mike, I don't know whether Vic has managed to share those or not, or whether we could put them on screen, or if you'd like me to, I can probably get them on screen if that's useful.
That would be helpful because I don't know where they are actually. So that's my inefficiency. You've got the permission to share screen, so go for it. I'll stop the share here.
So what I've got here is I've got two pictures. I'm not sure I can put them side by side. Anyway, so I've taken this one as I laid out all the tools that I generally carry with me on every job. Now, 90% of these fit inside my normal toolbox, and I've got a fairly bog standard Draper toolbox that you buy from any DIY merchant. That fits everything in it that I need. And I can say with confidence, every single thing on these two slides gets used at least every job, if not every other job. There are very few things in there that get used rarely. Probably the main one for that would be the grinder, you can see top center, and the milliput. Milliput is a life insurance policy for when you're doing a survey in between tides, the steel vessel in the Thames, for example, and you're hammering away and you put your hammer through the bottom. You need to fix it quite quickly if there's no welding facilities nearby. So milliput's a good get you out of jail ticket, really. And I think probably the first question I'd throw at everyone here for you to think about in your head is, what sort of surveyor do you think you're going to be? And to give you my answer to that question based on 13 years experience, is I started off like most people thinking small craft surveyor, it's going to be yachts, motorboats, or lots of FRP work. Although, during the modules that you choose when you're studying, you may well choose to do the module on wood, you may choose to do the module on iron and steel, aluminium. But for me, initially, it was all about FRP. And I really didn't start doing iron and steel until I'd been surveying for about 3 years. And then I started doing narrowboats, and then gradually broadened out into Dutch barges. And I now do heritage riveted iron and steel vessels. And that's a very niche skill set. My first question is, in your heads, think, what sort of surveyor am I going to be? Because that will very much cross off several of the things on the table you can see in front of you that won't be necessary. So, for example, up here, top left-hand corner, this is my ultrasonic thickness meter. I've got a Cygnus General purpose, ultrasonic thickness meter. I've been using this now for coming on for 10 years. I found this to be very reliable. And then here in a row, if you can see my mouse cursor moving, is a set of 6 certified thickness calibration blocks. Normally, when you buy one of these thickness meters, it comes with a little sort of 15 mil test block. I think 50 mil is great, but I very rarely survey steel that's 15 millimeters thick. So hence why, and this set of blocks here, it goes from 1.5 millimeters up to 20. So that gives me good confidence that I know that the meter is reading thin steel as well as thick steel. But if you don't ever see yourself doing ultrasonic surveys of steel vessels, then spending the several hundreds, thousands of pounds setting yourself up to do this is money you don't need to spend. And that's why at the other end of the table, here you have my 2 main moisture meters for measuring moisture content on FRP hulls. I started out with a Skipper Plus, which is a very reasonably priced moisture meter. It gives a good indication of what's going on. But if you really want to get into the detail of understanding what's going on, both in the shallow and the deep context within FRP, particularly with cored hulls and things like that, which are increasingly common, then you need to really splash out the money on something like a Sovereign that I've got here. Much more expensive than the Tramex Skipper Plus, but it's a much more capable piece of kit. Other pieces of kit to draw your attention to, Multimeter. I find uses for a fluke in almost everything I do these days. And a battery tester. Those 2 things are to be able to condition test the battery. So this is a load tester. It just puts a heavy load. There's a big wire coil inside here, which just applies it across the batteries, kind of shorts them through that, and it measures the voltage drop. Very effective piece of kit, quite reasonably priced. And then once you've kind of taken that decision, is it FRP, is it steel, or is it both? That then drives what I'd say are the big purchase items. And those are the things that are the initial outlay is quite daunting. To kit yourself out for less than £500 would probably be a challenge. I think if you had an initial kit out price of £1,000, that would get you everything except for the 2 expensive things at opposite ends of the table. Other things that I have found useful and have acquired over the years is a pair of sort of a trio of micrometers. The main one here, the Vernier gauge micrometer, used for measuring thickness of wire, thickness of chain. It's important when you're writing your surveys, you can comment on, what the standing rigging was composed of. Because if it's a 42-foot yacht and it's all 5 millimeter standing rigging, you might conclude that was a bit light. So being able to say with certainty that it's all 5, or the backstays are 6, or the shrouds are different, you need something to measure accurately. That's very useful. The rotary style one here, I don't use that quite as much, but sometimes it's useful for places where it's hard to get to with the long one, so that's useful. And then for a steel surveyor, this is a really key piece of kit. This is a pit dial micrometer. So it's got a small protruding needle at the bottom on a flat surface. So you calibrate it on a piece of tests. I've got an aluminium test block here. So I know it's flat. Calibrate to 0, and then you put that over a pit, and obviously the needle will protrude into the pit and give you a reading. So if you're trying to describe the degree and severity of pitting that's evident, that's an important skill for a steel thickness survey, because it's the thickness of the steel at the bottom of the pit that's relevant. If you have a 6 millimeter plate with a 2 millimeter pit, there is only 4 millimeters left. You'd be surprised how many bottom plates on narrowboats you'll find with deep pits on thin plates. And whilst you don't necessarily put your hammer through them, it's very indicative of serious thickness loss, and that then brings into question the insurability of the vessel. Then other things to look at, a general selection of spanners, my wood spike here, telescopic magnet for those rare occasions when I drop something into the bilge of a boat, extending mirror, antifreeze tester, another mini socket set here. Key to the British Waterways system, along with gas blocker key, litmus paper, both types. pH 1 to 14, and then neutral, very useful. Top of the table, measuring devices, so 30-meter tape, which occasionally that's not been long enough. As a small craft surveyor that does Dutch barges, my largest vessel today is 32 meters. But anyway, so that does for the majority of jobs, and then a 5-meter flexible steel tape for all manner of jobs, two pendulum dead weights, and 2 strong magnets, so that if I need to measure the beam of a narrowboat, I can put a pendulum, or not a pendulum, got the name of it. So I can draw one, put a magnet on one side with the weight hanging down, but go to the other side, do the same, and then measure the beam. It's important to check the beam of a narrowboat. If something is being sold as a 6'10" narrowboat, able to fit through the entirety of the UK canal, when you find out it's actually 7 foot, that's significant. Maglite Torch, I've been a fan of Maglite Torches since my time in the military. Very reliable, LED now, so they last quite a long time, which is very good. And then if I go to the next page, we overlap slightly, you can see barcode scraper, ideal tool for taking antifoul off fiberglass boats when you're looking for wicking, osmosis, blisters, cracks, and a smaller one there, which is useful for tight spaces. And then 2 hammers, my Dutch barge hammer and my fiberglass hammer. You'll notice the difference in weight because you're trying to achieve similar effect, but at opposite ends of the energy spectrum, if that makes sense. For percussion testing of a fiberglass boat, it really is, you know, I'm holding it upside down. It's just a gentle tap, tap, tap. And then when you hear the tut, tut, you're listening for hollow sounds. If you just happen to hit the top of a blister, very different sound. You're feeling the rebound. Same principle with the Dutch barge hammer, only more energy required to get the same response from a sheet of steel. And thick steel rings a bit like a bell. Thin steel sounds a bit like if you imagine flicking an empty baked bean tin, that sort of tunk sound. And really thin steel normally ends up with a hole in it. Cans of yellow spray paint, not because I'm a budding Banksy, but it's the most effective way of marking up issues on a narrowboat or barge, particularly if you're doing a tidal survey, because it won't get washed off, whereas obviously the chalk mostly will. Interestingly, I did a follow-up insurance survey of a 29-meter Dutch barge up in London recently, which I last surveyed in 2016, at which I identified a suspect panel that needed overplating, and the spray paint was still there 5 years later, having been in and out of the water twice a day for 5 years. So buy yourself some decent spray paint. Long straight edge across the top of the table, very useful for checking for deck distortion or hull distortion, particularly on things like Beneteaus, Jeanneaus, anything that's been relatively lightly built. You're looking for, you know, when the boat comes out of the water and rests on its keel, does the bottom of the keel deflect upwards? You're looking for things like that because that's indicative of a structure that's not as strong as it should be, or it could be because over time, particularly after groundings in particular, you'll find deformation of the hull and around the chain plates, things like that. So having a long straight edge is very useful. And then moving on, knee pads. I am of a young age of 52, but yeah, my knees don't work very well. So a good pair of knee pads is essential. And then probably the last thing I've not really mentioned is my small protimeter, which is a wood moisture meter. Quite expensive for what it is, but actually very effective. So, you know, for any of you that season your own firewood at home, a useful piece of kit to have at home, regardless of whether you're a surveyor. But for testing moisture in wooden vessels, absolutely essential to have something that can do that. And you'll be amazed how you'll find astonishing readings in places where you least expect it. So well worth having something like that. That pretty much all fits into my toolbox. And I normally have a second box in the car, which will have the big chunky items in it, along with spares of batteries for everything I've got, a high-vis jacket, my hard hats, all the things that I don't need on most jobs, but there's a box, it goes in the back of the car and it can just stay there and get pulled out as and when I need it. So in terms of total value of what's on that table, I have a tools policy in my insurance, and to replace a lot of that would come close to £5,000 to replace with new and like for like. Yeah, so that's a very daunting bill to face as a new surveyor, but that's why I say I reckon, you know, there are the two really big items: the thickness meter at this end and the sovereign moisture meter at that end. You know, you can buy yourself, you know, I've always used the Fluke multimeter, they're the best in the world. You know, that's also a few £100s. You can buy a much cheaper one, which would do 95% of the same job, as long as you use it carefully. So there we go, that's pretty much it. In terms of what I use most, every job is different. And, you know, one of the great joys about being a surveyor is, you know, when you turn up at a job, you know, let's say I'm going to a narrowboat survey, it's a It's a Springer, a classically lightly built narrowboat. Most of them were built with 5mm bottom plates to start with. As you approach the boat, you very quickly get in your head a feel for, is this a hammer first or is this a probe first boat? And several times I've concluded this is a hammer first boat because I know I'll get the most information from the hammer, and sure enough, within 5 minutes you put a hole in the bottom of the boat. Whereas other boats where you look at it, I can see this boat is in good order. I'm probably gonna get more information going with the probe first, and then that might focus much. So you're trying to work out which is the best tool to start the job, because that will lead you down the part of investigation that is pretty much the heart of every survey. Trying to ascertain the full condition of a vessel to the best of your ability, regardless of what it's made of. Other things, safety glasses, absolutely critical. Also in the big box, I've got a couple of pairs of good quality ear defenders, got my hard hat, high-vis jacket, latex gloves, dust mask when I'm scraping anti-fouling. So again, PPE, you can do that quite cheaply. The construction industry has so much of it these days that you can kit yourself out quite safely for good money. A pair of really good boots. I use hard as nails boots, which are leather with steel toe caps, and they're pretty waterproof, I find, for most jobs. And then a good set of Captain Curry fisherman's trousers and a fisherman's jacket for when it is absolutely chucking it down. So because getting cold and wet while surveying will greatly reduce your the quality of your output over time. There we go. So that is a quick 15-minute intro into what's in my toolbox. Now, probably the most productive thing we're going to do today is to start on the Q bit, so I can give you some A's to go with it. So question and answers. So Mike, you can still hear me, I assume?
I certainly can.
So I think if we open it up to questions now, happy to field questions on any of what's there. If it's used, we can leave the screen on, or we can put me large. I don't mind which.
Yeah, can I start actually, David? I mean, you've prompted a couple of things that perhaps are worth a quick discussion. One is the calibration of equipment, because there was a case in the last 12, 18 months where it ended up in court, and the eagle-eyed lawyer, cross-examining barrister, whatever, said to the guy, when did you last have your equipment calibrated? And the guy said, well, I haven't. And it cost him the case, because they said, well, then you can't rely on what, on the findings that you are displaying. Can you say a little bit about the importance of calibration of equipment? Yeah,
very much so. And I'll talk about the two main meters, which both have calibration kind of requirements. On the ultrasonic thickness meter, like I say, I was never happy with the 15mm block that it comes with, hence why I invested in these. So that is a set of 6 calibrated thickness blocks. If I zoom in a bit on that. Oh, I'm being shown the wrong thing. There we go. There you go, give you a feel for it. So that is a set of calibration blocks. I think that set me back the best part of £150. And it serves one purpose only, and that's to give me confidence that the meter is doing what it's meant to do. Occasionally you drop it, occasionally you need to change the membrane on the probe just because it's split or it's getting too hard or scratched. And straight away, halfway through a job, if I need to, I can just go and do a very quick confidence check. So those are all certified steel calibrated thickness blocks. This is a piece of 8mm aluminium sheet, which I got from a boat builder in France, because of course the speed of sound in aluminium is different to the speed of sound in mild steel, significantly so that it'll put your readings out by 15%-ish, which if you've calibrated the wrong way round, will have a significant impact on the assessment you make of the thickness of steel remaining. So that's on-site calibration. And then every year, 18 months, I send it back to Cygnus. I'll pay them to calibrate the probe, the device, make sure that everything's in good working order. And you'll probably pay 140-ish pounds for that. Very quick service. They're super guys. It'd be remiss of me not to mention Tritex, the other main supplier of thickness meters to iron and steel surveyors. Both very good devices. I've had a look at both side by side. I'm still using my Cygnus because it meets my needs. It's not broken yet. But if I was to replace it, it would be a tough choice. They're both very good. I prefer the LCD dial on the Tritex. I think that's more readable in bright sunlight, whereas I prefer this one when I'm deep underneath a Dutch barge in a dry dock with not much light. So they really are horses for courses. I bought this one because the company run by ex-military, so I'm a veteran, So, naturally my business goes to the veteran first. But actually, in truth, between the two of them, tough choice. But I'd advise you, next time you get a chance to see, John Charland brings his thickness meters along to various things that we do in the IIMS. Go and have a look at them, go and have a play, see if you can get your hands on someone else's Cygnus, put the two side by side, see which one you like best. In terms of calibrating the moisture meter, it's just there on shop. Here on, so you got the sensor head there, which has got the moisture pad on it, and you can put it up against that, and that will give you a self-calibration on site to make sure that it's reading correctly in both shallow and deep mode. Occasionally, I find it drifts off. They're relatively easy to recalibrate. To give the guys a ring, and they'll talk you through a recalibration that you can do at home. Very simple, and then you can just recalibrate it. So nice and easy. So there's on-site calibration is probably the most important thing, but more importantly than that, and the case that Mike raises instantly makes me think, if you don't calibrate on site and record the fact that you calibrated on site, if you don't send it away for calibration, then you really don't have a leg to stand on. You're relying on a gauge that you can't know to be reliable. If you're a year out of your certification from the manufacturer, but you're still using a decent set of calibration test blocks on site, that's a fairly strong case to say, I know it's reading as it should do. I had no reason to doubt the accuracy of the device on that day.
So David, Graham has posed a question of me, which I can't answer actually. You might have a view. Was the lawyer referring to factory calibration or 15mm block calibration? I don't know the answer. No, and the answer is largely irrelevant in many ways. A good surveyor puts down what their survey routine is. So, for example, I'll try and paraphrase what I'd say for a steel vessel survey. The hull was marked off at 1 meter intervals from bow to stern, and a sample of readings were taken above, on, and below the waterline and across the bottom plate. In total, approximately 150, 200, 250 readings were taken. On the side and back plates, they ranged from 4.6 to 5.8. On the bottom plate, they ranged from 6.2 to 7.4, thus representing an average thickness loss of them. Thickness readings were taken using a Cygnus 4 general purpose ultrasonic thickness meter, which was calibrated on site using a range of calibration test blocks from 1.5 to 20 millimeters. And the unit was last certified by the manufacturer in 2020. So there you've put down the methodology, how many readings you took, how you tested it on site, that it had been serviced. You can argue whether 12 months, 18 months, it doesn't really matter. It has been serviced and it's checked on site. You're straight away, you're covering your backside by showing that you've done a thorough job. An example, I surveyed a narrowboat recently, a couple of months back, and I started off, depending on the layout, I either started at the front or the back. And I started at the stern this time, and I'm doing the bottom plate measurements, and it's 10, 10, 9, 8, 9, 8, 10, 5, 6. 10, 10, 6, 10, 10, 6. And at 16 meters, just as the swim starts at the back end and the hull starts to taper, the base plate was 10 millimeters. Everything forward of that was 6 millimeters. So it had been built with 2 different thicknesses of plate. Said that to my client, and my client walked away. He said, I want a 10 millimeter bottom plate. So straight away, the owner says, well, the last surveyor said it was a 10 mil bottom plate. And I've told them your findings, and they stand by theirs, and they say it's a 10 millimeter bottom plate, to which I said, I have over 50 ultrasonic thickness readings showing it's a 6 millimeter plate with readings ranging from 5.6 to 6. There is no denying the fact it's a 6 millimeter plate. Your surveyor was wrong. Then the broker chips in and says, well, no one's ever made a narrowboat with different plate thicknesses for the bottom plate. Well, they do. It's not common, but because I had explained the methodology, the way that I'd done it had been systematic. I had readings to back up what I said. I know that it's not going to come back to bite me, and I feel for the other surveyor who basically obviously did a couple of the back when it's 10 mil, and came to a logical conclusion that given that 98% of vessels are built with the same thickness bottom plate, it was all 10 mil. But unfortunately, he was wrong. David, I have another question for you. What is the normal timeline for factory calibrations from sending them away to your return in your experience? And is there a need for 2 items with offset calibration dates? Question.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I find turnaround from Cygnus to be very good. Cygnus charge for their certification checks. I think Tritechs include them for free for the lifetime of the device in its original ownership. So different business models there. I find the turnaround to be very quick. Yeah, I've got a really nice little padded cardboard box, and it goes away and they send it back in the box. So it's very slick. I would say probably turnaround time a week, 10 days at most. That would never, in my mind, justify having a second device for the cost of the device. And, you know, generally, I don't need to give them much lead time. So around about this time of the year, for me, the work for iron and steel is picking up. The best time for me to send that away is in the middle of the summer when I'm mostly doing plastic.
A couple of other points from me, I suppose, that are sort of cropped up in my mind. Camera. What's your view on using, you know, a phone camera versus a more traditional camera? Do you have a strong view on that these days?
It's a very good point. That wasn't on my toolbox picture, should have been. I use an Olympus Mu tough camera, waterproof, shockproof, very good. I've got a nice thick lanyard. It goes around my neck, and I just use that. This will then lead into the next question about, do you put photos in reports? I don't. As a matter of preference, I did when I was new, because I thought that was helpful. Actually, I think if you can't describe something on a vessel without needing a photograph to back it up, then you probably need to work on your report writing skills. But on a typical survey, I will take 80 to 120 pictures. Very much useful as a record. I often find if I do, you know, 3 Moody 31s in the space of a 6-week period, it does start to blur which one had which issue with which bit. So having a good photo record for yourself is really important. Yep. So I've got, like I say, decent camera, digital camera. I'm on my second one now. The first one lasted for 10 years, did well. So I bought myself a new one 3 years ago. It sits on a lanyard inside my t-shirt, so it stays warm, mostly out of harm's way, and it's very effective.
One for Studio One.
Sorry about that interference. Just muted the guys down. Okay, so David, I've got another question for you. Justin Lane, why does David have certified thickness steel but not aluminium?
That's a very good question. I have, in 13 years of surveying, only surveyed 2 aluminium vessels. So there has not been the need to do that. And then I found myself in a situation where I went over to France recently to do an OVNI 345 and realized then that, there was nowhere I could calibrate my probe for steel because of the blocks I have, but didn't have anything. So they obviously they build and fabricate things there. So I plugged that small piece of 8mm offcut, measured it with all 3 with 3 micrometers to confirm it was 8mm to within at least 1/10 of a millimeter, and that's good enough. So you're right. You know, if that were to come back and bite me, you would argue, you know, had I done enough? Well, I've done as much as I could practically do on the day. Does that now justify spending £150 on a set of calibrated test blocks? Questionable. But yeah, it's a fair point.
Staying with Justin as well, another question coming back to cameras. Does David use an endoscope for hard to reach places? I mean, that is an interesting question.
Oh, yeah, it is. So endoscope has been on my wish list for a while now. And I still haven't got around to buying it. And there's a problem here. And you know, for those of you that have heard Karen Brain from Matrix Insurance speak to you, you know, she's got a wonderfully encyclopedic knowledge of things that cunning solicitors and barristers will say to catch you out. Picture the scenario. I'm in the aft end of a very nice yacht, and you know, I can't get to a certain key bit of infrastructure, a through hole, for example, that's hidden behind, you know, fixed furniture, but there's a small vent that I could get my endoscope through. So I think, right, the best service I could do for my client is to get the endoscope in, have a look through there, satisfy myself that the through hole fitting that's beneath this hidden furniture is good. So I do that, and I comment on that. The boat then later sinks because that through hole fitting sheared off. So I find myself in court. Probably the first question, prompted by an expert witness, I imagine, the first question that the prosecution will ask is, like, out of interest, if you could access that through hole with a endoscopic camera, why didn't you inspect the 2 on that side, which are also behind fixed furniture? And you suddenly find yourself in a really tricky situation. So as a rule of thumb, if I can access it, I will assess it. If I can't access it, but I know it's there, then I'll comment it was there, but I couldn't access it. My job is not to take the boat apart. If I need to start using screwdrivers to take panels off, then where do you stop? And this is a challenge. So for a small craft surveyor, the likelihood of having one of the boatyard staff on hand at your beck and call, ready to lift panels, move things with the owner's permission, that's all quite challenging. So you need to work out, what do I gain by having an endoscope versus what implied liability do I run the risk of putting myself at if I use it and then find that the conclusions I drew from using an endoscope, which is only a partial inspection, actually came and caused me to come unstuck. So that's a very tricky question to answer. Like I say, I've been thinking about it for about 2 or 3 years now. I could count on one hand the number of jobs where it would have been genuinely useful. But sometimes it's better to just say, I know it's there, but I couldn't get to it. Sorry.
That's good advice, David. A couple of other things that occur to me really that you've said, and I would just come back on, I don't want to turn this into a report writing seminar. We do 4 of those a year, and some of you will have been on those. But it is just worth referencing, I think, photographs for a minute. And the definition of a report is that it's a written document. And I think there is a clue in the words written document there. So I would give that as a piece of advice. And just a piece of advice on photos. Yes, as David says, you take 100, 200, whatever. You probably don't show them to anybody. You keep them in case you're required to prove something further down the line. Do not tamper with those photos. They should be stored exactly as they come off the camera. Don't resize them, don't rename them, don't change the orientation from landscape to portrait and so on, just leave them as they are, and that's very important. I'll keep going, David. I've got 2 more things I think that I'd like to put before you.
So on your storage of photos there,
yeah.
what I do as a general routine is obviously, I've got my folder structure on my computer with all of my reports on there. So inside each specific vessel folder, there's a folder that says originals and one that says exports. So when they come off the camera, they go in the originals and they just stay as they are, as they go. And then if I want to change one or use it as the cover photograph, I'll always put a cover picture on the boat of a general, wide angle thing. Then I'll then export that and then save that in the exports folder. So there's a very clear line between original untouched photos, as Mike says, and then a separate folder with anything I need to do. And like if I need to advise the boatyard on steel repairs, I might send them a picture, So that's where I'll put the exports once I tampered with them before I send them.
Now, I might have missed this, in which case I apologise. I don't see a cloth tape measure on your table. Maybe I've missed it, but did I miss it? That is a cloth one. Okay, my apologies. The reason for just mentioning that is we piled on, a group of us were in Palma doing some training a couple of years back now, and we all piled onto a rather lovely boat and pulled out a steel tape measure and drew it across the deck. The skipper almost kicked us off the boat. He was extremely unhappy, in which case we apologised profusely and got the cloth tape out. So there's a time when a cloth tape is very important to have. And just sticking with measuring for a minute, one of the things that we wrote an article, I think Geoffrey Casciani Wood wrote an article relatively recently on measurement or measuring things. You should measure something yourself unless you can be absolutely certain that the source you are getting the measurements from is accurate. And that also has caught surveyors out, has it not?
Yeah, it does. And it's very important. So you can see here, from the micro scale down here, accurate to, in the right hands, accurate to 1/10 of a millimeter or better, to the sort of more macro scale here, you have to state the accuracy of your measurements. So for example, if I'm doing a 25-meter Dutch barge, I plonk my toolbox at the front with the tape underneath it, and it's very much that looks to be about level with the forward edge of the stem post. I then run it back. But at the end of the day, it's accurate to plus or minus 20 centimeters. So it's important you quote the accuracy of the measurements you take. So when I'm doing my normal routine, let's say, no matter what the vessel is, yacht, narrowboat, it doesn't matter, is I lay the tape down the side of the vessel and then I chalk up numbers, and that's what we call meter stations. So in commercial shipbuilding, they'll be doing it by the numbered frames of the vessel because they've got a frame map drawn out for them. On a private vessel, you don't have that, so you just do it in 1 meter sections. And the normal routine is, I do a line, then a number, and the number is always aft of the line. So if I look at a boat and it's got, line number, from my perspective, that's clearly the port side. If the number's there, that'd be the starboard side. So I can know just by looking at a photo straight away with how the number and the line orientate which side of the vessel it is. but then always important to quote the accuracy of the measurements you're using. So you mentioned if I'm using a Multimeter, dial depth thing, that's accurate to getting on for, a tenth, maybe even as good as 100th of a millimeter. But you've got to have context. How flat is the surface either side? How good a reading are you getting? But again, it's about know the accuracy of the devices you're using, no matter what they are. Quote that accuracy and quote how you use it. It's very important you define your methodology in your reports. Otherwise, you find yourself in a situation that surveyor did with that narrowboat, where he didn't notice the fact that 3/4 of the bottom plate was 6 mil and not 10.
A question from Graham. How do you determine the widest point for beam measurement?
Yeah, tricky, very tricky. It's naked eye. It's nothing more than that. So if it's a production boat, then you can generally, before I go to the boat, I'll have copied down the general dimension specifications from any of sailboat data, yachts.net. There's loads of online resources which will give you a feel for the specifications of the boat at build. And then on the day, really hard with the yacht, and sometimes the way it's been supported means you can't get a tape underneath it, so you have to kind of adapt on the day. But generally, I'll put my two weights either side and measure straight through the middle at what I consider to be the fattest part of the boat, which is generally slightly after the mast, but not always the case. So it varies from boat to boat, but it's naked eye. But the point is, you're not trying to prove the beam of the boat. You're showing the fact that you checked the beam of the boat. It was within 3% of the quoted beam of the boat. Therefore, one can conclude this is as it's stated in the particulars. With yachts, not so critical. With narrowboats, much more critical. If you are buying a narrowboat for cruising around the entire UK network, it needs to be 6'10" or less. If it's more than that, you will struggle to get in and out of some knocks. So that's a critical measurement to make. Thankfully, for most narrowboats, they're pretty uniform, parallel-sided vessels. But again, use your eye. I always try and spot the worst thing I can to measure. That will then give me the safest possible answer.
Thank you, David. I've only got one more question, and we still welcome questions from delegates. So if there's anything else you want to know whilst we have David, now's your opportunity to quiz him. But can I just ask you about oil sample or oil analysis sampling testing? I don't see a testing kit in your equipment. I'm not sure how popular that is. How many surveyors do it? I don't know.
Yeah, some do. It's a service. I don't carry out testing it myself. You just buy the kits from a company like Oil Labs. They'll send you the kit. You take the sample, you send it off. In 13 years of surveying, no one has ever asked me to do it.
Okay, maybe it's more prevalent overseas. I know in America they do a lot
more
of this.
overseas, and particularly once you get into the super yacht situation where you got big MTUs and things like that. As I'm a mechanical engineer, so I know my way around small combustion engines of all varieties and types. So I can come to a fairly confident conclusion about the general condition of an engine, either with running it or without. And there's a massive difference to the information you can get. I can draw an oil dipstick and look at the oil and come to a reasoned conclusion as to what I think the condition of the oil is. But then, whether you need to go down the whole oil health monitoring route, and the trouble is, it's a simple snapshot. If the vessel has a conscientious owner or engineer, there will be a long record of monthly or bi-monthly oil health reports, because as a one snapshot of data, it's meaningless. You need to do it conscientiously on a regular period over a sustained period of time to develop an understanding about what's going on. And that's when you're looking for increases in certain types of metal particulate, which might indicate again bearing failure. And so without that continuous set of data, a one-off oil test is largely meaningless.
Thank you, David. Any more from anybody? Or have we exhausted you all? Here we are. We have Graham back again. Yeah, shout out.
Yeah, my name is Nimrod. I'm from Israel.
Hello, Nimrod.
Hello. What about a mast climbing equipment, like a bosun chair or something to check riggings? Do you have anything like this?
Yeah, I do. I'm a former rock climber, so I've got my own climbing harness, and then I've got a large figure eight descender, and then two. Got the name of lock-off descenders. So in essence, if I'm going up the mast, I'll want an experienced person or winch below, and I'll generally use two lines and one that they can winch me up on, And then once I'll Jumar my way up using one of my ascenders, so that if it all goes wrong, I'm still held on a fixed line, even if the winch fails or the bloke falls asleep, whatever it is. And then from there, I can always get myself down. So all I then need to do is to switch over to the figure of 8, throw myself on, I can abseil off. So yeah, I have rock climbing skills so that I can do it safely to keep myself safe. I've never trusted bosun's chairs because I don't own one. Therefore, I'd be borrowing someone else's kit for a safety critical role. I'm not going to do that. But by and large, I think I've probably been up the mast. If I go up the mast more than twice a year, that's a lot in the work that I do. Some yards do it more. And by and large, if the yacht's out of the water, then you have to say, I can only see it from deck level. I can't go up the mast because the boat's out of the water. But based on what I've seen, I don't think there's a pressing need for a rigging technician to go up. But if I do, then I'll comment on that report. So I'll say to the client, based on what I've seen and knowing the age of the rigging to be around about 10 years old, it's probably time for a professional rigging survey. I'm no more a professional rigging surveyor than I'm a professional engine surveyor. As a marine surveyor, you become jack of all trades, master of maybe one or two. And it's important to know the limitations of your knowledge, and when you have to advise the client, you need to bring some expert help in from outside to do that.
Thank you very much.
Sound words as well about specialisms, I think, but that's a discussion for another day. So what approach do you take with onboard LPG systems, asks Graham? Do you test appliances? If so, do you carry a gas detector? And also, he says there appears to be a credit card and a cork on the table.
I'll do the two easy ones first. So the cork is designed to fit on top of my spike, which I use for testing soft wood. And the cork stops me testing myself for it when I stick my hand in my toolbox. Credit card over here, this is actually a card, if I zoom in, it'll be a bit more useful, I imagine. So this is the card that comes from Cygnus, came with the thickness thing. And what they do this test here where you can put the card on top of the thickness block and it will get the reading through that. So that gives you confidence that the thickness meter is reading through the bitumen coating, whatever it is that's on the vessel. Because a triple echo ultrasonic meter works on ignoring the thickness and just giving you the thickness of the steel beneath. So that's what that's for. That answer that first bit of the question?
It does.
And then the second bit was talking about testing of gas systems. So first things first, I am not a gas safe register approved gas fitter. I looked into doing that as a sort of an additional qualification in the early days. And it was Worcester Technical College. No, wrong, sorry, different course. So yeah, it's gas safe register. So to do that, you need to do general LPG appliance training. You then subspecialize in doing mobile homes and yachts, and then you do 18 months apprenticeship as a gas fitter. I did not have the time or inclination to do that. So first thing to say is, whenever I comment on a gas system, I say, I am not a gas safe registered tradesman. However, what do I actually look for on the day? I'm looking for the quality of the installation. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the boat safety scheme, any vessel on the inland waterways that wants to be registered with the Canal and Rivers Trust must have an in-date BSS examination certificate. BSS examination is another sub-specialization I considered doing for a while, but I've discounted that. And so a BSS certificate is valid for 4 years, and that is done by someone who is gas safe register approved to do testing on mobile home and yacht appliances. And that's where they'll go and test with a manifold, test the gas pressure, all the things you need to do that. For me, it's a visual inspection. I'm looking at the age and condition of the flexible hoses. If they're at one end or both ends, I'm looking for the condition of the regulator. Does the gas locker vent overboard? Is the vent larger than 90 millimeters? So in essence, I'm using the boat safety scheme handbook as a guideline for this is the kind of spec I would expect to see. So I can advise my clients to the best of my ability to say, based on what I've seen and using recognized legislation for this type of vessel, I can say that it's probably fit for use as it is. However, you might recommend upgrading the system by putting in a bubble tester to test for leakages. So you draw conclusions about the condition of the system as you see it, but mindful of the fact that you are not a gas safe registered tradesman. For a yacht down on the coast, there is no requirement at all for the gas system to be safe. There is no requirement for a BSS certificate. There is no requirement for a periodic inspection. And so I generally find the condition of gas systems on yachts and motorboats at times to be dangerous. And so again, you have to draw the conclusion, in my opinion, not as a gas safe registered tradesman, this system is dangerous as seen on a survey and it needs immediate inspection and certification. Or you might just say the gas hoses are old, they're 10 years old, they need replacing, or the clips are rusting, whatever it is. So yeah, it's very much a typical marine surveyor's approach. You know, I'm not a gas safe registered tradesman, but I know what a good gas system should look like.
I think that's good advice, David. Thank you. Justin has a question. What is David's opinion on battery hydrometers? As if testing antifreeze, would it be useful for the readings in a lead acid battery or rely only on drop test?
I've never tested for battery hydrolyte levels. Never felt the need to. For me, the battery either passes load test or it doesn't. Taking the batteries apart and getting inside that, it's just, it's a level of detail. I've never been asked for it. And so, you know, the way I do surveys is driven by the types of boats that I survey and 13 years of experience and exposure to clients and knowing what they want and aren't bothered by. So I've never done that. But by and large, most marine batteries have a pretty tough life. When they're shot, they're shot. You know, fine tuning the hydrolyte levels for me is, you know, it's often hard enough work just getting all of the positive cables off a bank of 6 batteries so I can test each battery individually. You know, and then having to get all the clamps back on, get them tight. Going back to something I said earlier, you could argue that, well, if you took the battery bank apart to test the batteries individually, why didn't you do X, Y, and Z down the line? And you know, this is where you have to reach a standard of practice in how you do your surveying that both reflects what you can do as a surveyor. And, you know, and some of you will come from engineering background, some of you may come from naval architecture background, some of you may come from, you know, being a fireman. I've no idea. And so it's about understanding, you know, what skills do you bring to the game? So know what you're good at, but also identify in those areas. Well, do you know what? I don't really know my way around an engine, for example. You know, if you can't identify, you know, where the oil filters are, where the fuel filters are, the types of hoses that have been used, the exhaust arrangements, the cooling arrangements, if that's not a natural skill set that you have, then I'd strongly advise you to invest some time in that. I see many surveyors, and as Mike said, I'm a board member of the IIMS, so I also sit on the professional assessment committee. So I see lots of other surveyors' reports come across my desk. And it astonishes me how many surveyors say, didn't look at it. And they're happy with that as an output. For me, I would feel kind of like I was not giving my client a full and proper service if I didn't even comment on the engine, even just to say the paint finish was good, it was as described, it appeared to be securely mounted. Yeah, but just to say the engine's not surveyed as part of the survey strikes me as you know, a failure on the part of a conscientious surveyor. So battery testing, do I do it? No, I've never been asked to do it. Do I feel my survey routine is somehow lacking because I don't know? But the drop testing is important. And yeah, several times I've identified vessels where the batteries are shot, and sometimes they're just flat. The boat's been left on the hard, not connected to shore power. The batteries just happen to be flat, and that's life.
Hi, David, sorry, it's Justin here. I was just more asking from the perspective of rather taking the batteries apart individually to be able to do the drop test. If you took a hydrometer reading from them, you get a fairly good idea of whether they're past their best or not, just from the rating of the battery,
that's very true.
rather than dismantle it. That was more my sort of question.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I mean, yeah, whereas for me, you know, taking the battery cables off so I can drop test them, sometimes you can't do that. You know, sometimes they're so boxed in that you can't isolate each battery, and therefore the drop test is mean. You can't drop test a whole battery bank. So I have to say, no one's ever asked me for it. I've never seen a report across my desk where they've done that or commented on that. If it's a skill set that you have that would add value to your reports, then by all means, go ahead and do it. Like I say, it's important to understand what you're good at, and then work on those areas, developing those areas where you feel your knowledge is weak. If you are an electronics expert, I do not consider myself to be an electronics expert at all. I can work my way around a circuit with a multimeter and a cup of coffee and some time, but I don't instinctively look at a circuit layout and go, that looks great. But I can do that to a mechanical circuit. And I once described this to a friend of mine who came into the industry from a fashion background. You know, the ability to go into any space on a vessel and look at it and just to kind of know that it looks right. you get an electrician will go and look at a fuse board and will know straight away whether the wires are of sufficient size for the role they've been given, whether the fuses are the right rating. That instinctive knowledge takes time to acquire. Now, some of you will be bringing that from your previous lines of work into marine surveying, which is great. Capitalize on that. So if you are a battery expert, electronics expert, whatever it is, make sure you capitalize on that, because that's a USP that you have that other surveyors will not have. Conversely, always be mindful of what the client wants and what you can and can't deliver. So if the client really wanted in-depth battery bank analysis, then I might try that, or I might just say, let's just get someone in, and then bring in outside help, because that's extra work I probably don't need to engage with on the day. Does that answer your question?
Yep, that does. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. I'll keep going. There's a couple more.
Could I say that's a quick
Yeah, Russell. Yeah.
yes, on the drop test. It's my experience that if the boat has a controller, a center controller for say a wind generator or solar panels, that the batteries have to be disconnected in a certain sequence. If you're not aware of that sequence, it's very difficult to disconnect the batteries to do a drop test. Perhaps then you should be doing a hygrometer test on the fluid. So, if you see those items of equipment on the boat, I would think twice about disconnecting the batteries without knowing what the correct sequence is.
Yep, totally correct. So if there's a live solar system or a live wind turbine system, it doesn't get tested because it's live. In the same way, yeah, if the vessel's connected to shore power, and I know that that's the only means of charging for those batteries, then I'll disconnect the shore power at the start of the day, give the batteries an hour or two to stabilize, and then that makes the drop test a valid thing to do. If it's got solar panels and I can see the solar charge controller, 2 green lights, just leave it alone. Your job is not to come to a conclusion on the condition of everything. Your job is to turn up on the day and get the best understanding of the condition of the vessel that you can, given the location, the time, the layout of the vessel, the design of the vessel, all of these things. And so Mike will often say on the report writing thing, what you write about what you did is important. But sometimes more importantly is you write about what you did not do or you could not do. So if I find a very nice solar charging system set up and I can see the system's live, I'm not taking it apart. That's an unfair expectation of a surveyor to turn up to a system they don't know and disconnect safely to test something that we know to be fully charged because the solar panel is running, and then put it all back together again. So that's kind of like a step too far. Does that answer your question, Russell?
Russell has another question that he popped on chat. He wants to know, is it necessary to remove antifoul before using a moisture meter on an FRP hull?
I tried to amend that, David, to a coupon of antifoul, not all of the antifoul.
Brilliant question, Russell. Brilliant question. Now, this can be quite a divisive topic for surveyors.
Mm-hmm.
My answer is classic ex-military. It depends on the situation. And let me explain. So the conventional theory for scraping coupons of anti-fouling off the boat is so you can expose wicking or blisters or cracks, or to give you a better understanding of the hull. In my experience, the chances of you hitting the right spot with your scraper to expose that fault, if it's not widely obvious, are by definition less than 1/10 of 1%. I use the sovereign moisture meter up here. I find that to be largely unaffected by anti-fouling if it's dry. So if the boat's fresh out of the water, you're not moisture testing it anyway. More important is to hammer test it, look for blisters, find obvious defects. So if you're doing a lunchtime survey in the slings at a busy boatyard, you're not going to moisture test the hull. There's no point. So that's where the hammer becomes more important. If the yacht's been on the hard for 3 months, we know the hull to be dry, then the moisture meter has more use, particularly if it's got a cored hull. So how am I going to scrape coupons of anti-fouling? It's a bit like when I approached the narrowboat and I said, this is a hammer first or a probe first boat. You kind of get a feel for it. So I don't always scrape is the answer. However, in my report, I'll always state if I did, how many coupons, if I did not, the reasons why I did not. So you're saying, that's my methodology. Now, I'm happy to defend my methodology. Some surveyors say you must always scrape. Some say, kind of find your own path. I've not been caught out on any vessel that I've not scraped yet. And generally, as I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm a percussion tester first. So, I will always learn more from hitting it with a small hammer than I will from using the moisture meter. But yeah, it's about putting the vessel into context on its age, the day, its condition, how good the anti-fouling is. If it's a hard worked weekend racer with really nice Hempel hard anti-fouling on it, I'm not taking my scraper anywhere near it, because all I'm going to do is piss people off. And the chance of me finding a defect that would justify the scraping is low.
Okay, another interesting question for you. Hello, Mark Ring. I hope you're well. What's your view on seacocks, as in when to replace, and are two Jubilee clips considered essential? Asks Mark.
Okay, so I'll do it in two parts. So when do you replace the seacock? If I knock it off with a hammer, it's clearly time for replacement. It's generally one of those things, you kind of get a feel for it. You start to spot quality seacocks from poor quality seacocks. If I find, it's one of those cheap, DZR, designification resistant brass fittings, and I find that the cheap little steel handle is rusting away in my hand, it's time to go. Because if the outside's rusting, the inside is. If I can't open or close it, it's time to go. If there's extensive corrosion on the outside, it's time to go. If there's any play in its fitting, it needs at least taking off and reseating or binning. If you can't get a hammer to it, get your foot on it, try and stand on it. No one in the right mind is going to criticize you for breaking a seacock during a sea trial, because if it does it 2 months later when they're at sea, the implications are much more serious. So yeah, and always look at the outside. The outside of the through-hole fitting is as important as inside. In my report, there's a table at the back of my report which lists where the through-hole fittings were by meter station, how high in millimeters above or below the waterline they were, what they were made of, what their purpose was, and then most importantly, whether I could access it internally or not, because you can't always get to them. Refer you back to my endoscope discussion earlier. If you can't get to it, you need to say that you couldn't get to it for these reasons, and therefore it was not thoroughly inspected. In terms of double Jubilee clips, yeah, it's good practice to fit good quality stainless steel Jubilee clips in mutually opposed pairs. So one screwed that way, one screwed that way. You don't always get the length of the stub on the fitting to do that. That's life. So I always advise clients, it's best to do it if you can, especially on any skin fitting below the waterline or any pumped circuit. But if you can't, that's just life.
Okay, thank you. A question from Don, which might be the last question. I don't see any others here, but Don says, how confident are you in the accuracy of moisture meters on FRP cord deck?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. You'll be amazed how many surveyors don't take their moisture meter onto the deck, is the first thing I'd say. To do that is a significant shortcoming in the modern era. Many boat builders use cord structures for the deck. It's cheap, they're strong, they can use less plastic, which is the expensive bit, and just fill it inside. And as you probably all know from your study, the composition of the core material is critical to its longevity. So closed cell foam, end grain balsa, you get some more complex honeycomb structures now. So they all have a lifespan. The trouble is that lifespan is dramatically influenced by the number of deck fittings. So you fit your nice four-deck fitting for a baby stay. It's bolted through the deck. There's 3, 4, 5 sometimes bolts through the deck. All of those are water ingress points into the core. So taking a moisture meter up on deck is critical. It's not about, though, in terms of how confident am I in the answer that I give the client, it's not about the numbers that come up. It's about the patterns that emerge. So, for deck work, I'll generally use the Tramex down here because it's very quick, on, off. I can leave it sitting on the deck, photograph it if I need to. And so if I'm finding very high moisture readings around deck fittings on a 25-year-old Juno, I've got to say that's to be expected. If I find the same high moisture readings on a 2-year-old Beneteau, that would be a surprise. So again, here it comes back to the numbers that the moisture meter produces in and of themselves are not the answer. The answer as a surveyor is you look at the data you gain by having a methodical approach to how do I survey the deck structure, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stand on my tippy toes and walk around, because you're feeling for softness, you're feeling for any deflection. I'm then going to lie down on the deck and look down it. Do I see any lumps and bumps, any unexplained deviation from the normal profile of the deck molding? I then get the moisture meter. I go around and think, I look at the condition and think, do I see cracks emanating from deck fittings? All of these things will give you clues as to why you suddenly found high moisture readings in the deck. In and of itself, that's not necessarily enough to condemn the boat. It's very easy to overreact in your recommendations simply because you detected high moisture. Example, I did an ETAP 26i recently, 26-year-old ETAP 26. When sold, defined as an unsinkable hull, because you've got an outer hull, an inner molding, and the space in between is filled with closed cell foam. Closed cell foam after 20 years is going to absorb moisture. That's inevitable. The whole principle, the osmotic principle applies to closed cell foam as it does to voids within the laminate. The moisture will go into that. So the moisture readings below the waterline were pretty much saturated throughout. Is that enough to not bite a boat? Is the key question you asked. And for me, the answer is no. No other defects were present. I've identified, a methodical approach. I've done the moisture survey. I've identified universally high levels of moisture within the whole core material. So what? So what? Do you tell your client not to buy it? Is there any other justification for why you shouldn't buy it? It's a perfectly sound hull, no cracks, no delamination, no core separation, none of the things that would give you genuine cause to say to the client, walk away. So in the absence of that, then the level of the moisture reading is, whilst relevant, only part of the story.
David, I'm conscious I popped over a question. I skipped over a question that I wanted to ask because it comes from Daniel. It's on a subject I find fascinating. What is your view on infrared cameras for testing hull condition?
Ah, good. I've seen them used. I don't have one.
They are expensive.
They are expensive. Tough one. But I think this is, like I said at the start, I started off just using a Tramex Skipper Plus, and then I bought a wood moisture meter, and then I bought a Sovereign moisture meter, and then I bought a Cygnus thickness meter and started doing iron and steel. Define what sort of surveyor you want to be. There are guys who do infrared surveys for a living, and they will get a much better answer in 1/10 of the time it will take you. So it's one of those things. Will this add significant value to my business? Now, I surveyed a 1920s converted fishing boat a couple of weeks ago up in Bristol. It had a fabulous old Lister Blackstone 6-cylinder engine, a 400 horsepower Lister Blackstone 6-cylinder. That would have been quite useful. To be able to go around the engine room with a thermal imaging camera would have been useful. And I would say probably in 13 years of surveying, I can count on one hand the number of times where a thermal camera would have been useful. So you run the risk that you go and buy the nice shiny piece of kit, and then it becomes a part of your routine, but it doesn't need to be. And with the best will in the world, you need to make money from this. You can't just keep on making your surveys get longer and longer and longer as you do more and more tests. Work out what the market needs from you. If you are a regular super yacht surveyor on the south coast of France, looking at big Caterpillar and MTU engines, then a thermal camera would probably be very useful to you. For me as a small craft surveyor in the UK, less so. And it's interesting, I commented on the time you spend on the survey. I find as every year goes past, it takes me longer and longer to do a survey. That's not because I'm getting old and slow. It's because the more I learn, the more I see, the more things I know I need to check. So my survey routine grows and grows and grows. And I would like to think that the quality of the output that I deliver is the better for that. And I've shared this story with Mike. I often dig out some of my very earliest survey reports up at this end of the shelf, back from 2008, 2009. I have a reread of them, and I think, how on earth did I not get sued? Because you just realise, but I came to surveying as a chartered engineer. I can string a good sentence together. I'm technically literate, and I thought I was producing good output. But then when you compare what's there with what's at the other end of the scale that I'm producing, in the last couple of years, the quality is dramatically different. And so be mindful of that. Don't rush to try and offer everything. Get the core structure of your survey routine correct. Measure the boat, describe what you saw, describe what you didn't see, write good defects, put those into context, so you can deliver the best advice to your client. and try and find someone to mentor you or to have a look at your reports or just give you some top tips. Really important.
I think my only other comment on thermal imaging is I've seen several presentations from manufacturers, distributors, and also from surveyors using the kit, is that you need to know what the camera is telling you and showing you. So there is some real training required. I think there's level 1, 2, and 3 from memory. And I don't know how much the training costs, but it's all very well looking at some beautiful images on the camera, but what actually is that image telling you? And you need to have the knowledge or acquire the knowledge to be able to then write up your report to explain what you found. Yeah. Any other comments, last thoughts, observations before we let David go and do some surveying or report writing? Are you busy, David? You're always busy.
Very busy. I said to Mike recently at a board meeting, this has been my busiest year. And part of that is because I'm ex-forces, my wife's ex-forces, so we only settled down 3 years ago. So every 2 years prior to that, we'd move house, and the small boat business is kind of, you go back to square one. So I've got the business bonus of now being in a stable position, but also as word spreads, the amount of work coming in has been phenomenal. This year's been amazing. 40% of my clients are first-time buyers. Not just buying little old scabby old Westerlies. Some of them are buying six-figure motor yachts and paying cash for them. The market has been astonishing this year. So I would suggest it's a good time to be entering the market as a surveyor.
Just a quick question, David. When we talked about moisture meters earlier on, you said you wouldn't use one if the boat was just out of the water and in the slings. Is that just because there's too much water, too much moisture still around, or?
Yeah, generally so. I mean, so normally I'll take the Tramex out and I'll just put it up against the hull, and that'll tell me straight away. There's no point, and you've only got an hour.
Yeah.
Surveying the slings, the yard want the lift back. You've got an hour tops. So it's about working out what's of most importance to get done during that time. And for me, it's going to be noting down the through hole fittings so I can get to them inside. Looking at the stern gear, so checking to do my prop checks, do my prop shaft checks, cutlass bearings if it's got them, looking at the rudder, playing the rudder. So there are more important things to do than note the moisture of a boat that's only out of the water for 1 hour. That's probably the most important thing I'd say. So like I say, I'll get the Tramex out because it's very quick, on, off, top sides, bottom sides, and if straight away it's off the scale at bottom, then I can put it back in the box. There's no real point in doing 20-minute moisture survey, which time I don't have when it's out of the water for just 1 hour.
Okay, yeah.
One more question for you. Does this also apply if the British weather is being typical, as the British weather can be?
Yeah, you're right. Now, this is a key skill you need to develop as a surveyor, is to know what's affecting the quality of your data when you go out to find it. So if the boat is freshly out of the water, then I know it's going to be shallow readings are all going to be very high because the antifouling will still be wet. Deep readings, I might get something useful out of that. If the boat has been out of the water on the hard for 3 months and it's been sunny this past week, I might reasonably assume that the hull is as dry as it's going to be. And then I've got to work out, okay, everything in between. If it's a wet day, if it's been a wet week, so whenever I do a fiberglass boat, one of my early questions to the broker is, when did she come out of the water? Because without that piece of information, it's very hard to put into context the readings that I get. If I get high moisture readings of the cord interior for a boat that's been on the hard all winter, then the high moisture readings aren't going away, are they? They're going to stay there in perpetuity. Conversely, if the boat has just come out of the water last week and I find low readings, that's really reassuring because the boat's come out and it wasn't clearly very wet when it came out, and that's shown by that data later on. So it's about, when you do your survey routines, is to work out, what do I need to know? What's the best way of going about getting that information? And once I've got that information, can I then put that into context to deliver useful feedback to my client? And if you can't get that basic process right, whether you're looking at the engine, the hull, the rudder, the standing rigging, whatever it is, that thought process needs to always be there. Hence why my company's called White Hat Marine Survey. The white hat thinking, Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. The person who wears the white hat is the person who's concerned with data and information. What do we need to know? How do we get the information? How can I then make use of that? And that's the key principle behind a lot of what we do as marine surveyors.
David, fantastic. I think that's a good place to draw a line and to say thank you very much for your time and your input. invaluable. I'm sure people will find that very helpful with their studies going forward. We'll make the video and Vicky will make it available. And thank you very much to everybody for being online with us today. It's good to see you all, and stay in touch.